Welcome to Double Vision Podcast. We're identical twin sisters who grew up with retinitis pigmentosa, a degenerative eye condition. I'm Jenelle, born 4 minutes earlier, so naturally I get to go first. And I also work as a therapist, so I'm drawn to stories of healing and resilience.
And I'm Joy. I work in the field of education, and I'm also a writer. I like to bring a creative lens to how we talk about blindness.
Though we look alike, we've often seen this disease and life through very different lenses.
That's why we created Double Vision Blog, to share our stories, our struggles, and our laughter,
which is now morphing into a podcast
to remind us that there's no single right way to navigate blindness.
On this podcast, we focus on the social and emotional impacts of losing vision,
the parts of the journey that don't show up on the eye charts. Welcome to Double Vision Podcast. Last week we were quadruple vision, and this week we are triple vision. I am Joy, and this is Jenelle. And we also are joined by a very special guest today. I actually met her 10 years ago at a meetup that I decided to randomly go to when we lived in Illinois in Chicago. And I took the train with my newly guide dog at that time and went to a guide dog meetup at a pizza place. And I met one of my best friends in the world, Melissa Taussig, and she's joining us today to talk about a very important topic in honor of National White Cane Day, October 15th. Cane-o-phobia. So welcome, Melissa, to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and just a big congratulations to both of you for launching the podcast.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, one of the reasons that we're really excited about having you on the podcast is you have many years of experience with working with clients on adjustment to vision loss. So can you talk a little bit about your background as a mental health counselor?
Sure. Yes, I am in private practice here in the Chicagoland area, and I've been a therapist for over 20 years now, which is so hard to believe. But I got my start actually in the vision rehabilitation setting, doing adjustment counseling in person as part of an interdisciplinary team of low vision optometrists and a rehabilitation teacher, an O&M specialist, a technology specialist. So that's how I kind of entered into the field. And now I work with clients in the blindness community as well as their family members and other loved ones.
Awesome. And yeah, one of the ways that we continue to connect with one another, the three of us, and then in a broader community is through the Daring Sisters. Can you talk a little bit about your work that you do with this really amazing organization?
Yes, I would love to. It's an organization that does mean so much to all three of us. That's where I first met you, Jenelle, was through your encouragement to come on the very first Daring Sisters retreat, which was back in 2016. And Daring Sisters is an amazing organization that was started by our good friend Becky Andrews, who is also a therapist who lives with RP. And Becky provides in-person retreats for women who are blind and low vision, as well as virtual retreats. And I've had the honor of getting to co-facilitate the virtual retreats with Becky.
We're so grateful that Becky launched Daring Sisters and that you're continuing to co-facilitate with her, Melissa. And as this podcast is focused on the social and emotional aspects of vision loss, a really important piece of adjusting to vision loss, or really to any disability, is finding connection and community within the disability community. And Daring Sisters is a place that really fosters that. Can you speak a little bit more to the impact of social connection?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a huge piece. I don't think I even realized it, as much until I was an adult myself, because I really did not know anyone else my age who was in a similar situation. But yes, through the retreats, we get to form real friendships and really get to show up for each other. We talk a lot about the quote from Brené Brown that when we deny our story, it defines us. And when we honor our story, we can write a brave new ending. And that's really what we do together. We spend a lot of time being able to share our stories in a group with other women who have the same shared experience of vision loss, so we can really honor, our similarities, as well as acknowledging the fact that we also have, different parts to our journeys. So those connections have just been really, really beautiful.
They really are. We're so grateful for that community. Joy and I also had not had many experiences with meeting other people with vision loss. And so this
No.
has opened up a whole new world. And I remember when I was in graduate school at University of Washington and I took my research methods class, it really got to dig into the research around social connections within disability. And there are numerous studies that allow us to see that as we connect with people who share the same disability, our levels of depression decrease and levels of self esteem actually increase. And
Mm.
I loved learning that from the research and then seeing it play out in my own life and in the lives of the Daring Sisters. And then also the men that you have some groups of men that you now support as well.
Yes, we also, when we realize the impact of how much that means, I think just the piece of knowing that we're not alone. It sounds so simple, but it's really so huge, that when sometimes we think, I'm just not good at this. I'm just, I'm the only one who feels that way. And so when we started to realize, no, it's not just me. This is something that we share. Becky and I both had clients who were men, and we just started wanting that level of connection for the men as well.
Right. So, diving into today's topic, one of the main reasons that we invited Melissa here today, besides the fact that we just love talking, is because we really wanted to dive into a topic that has come up a lot in our own WhatsApp conversations with each other and also as a group with the Daring Sisters and in conversation with other people in the blind community. And that is the leap of faith that sometimes takes to start using a cane and why it kind of has some stigma with it. And I think kind of to lead into that a little bit, I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit. They know about us, so I would love for them to hear a little bit about you and your journey with vision loss.
Yeah, I was born with underdeveloped optic nerves, or ONH. So I've had low vision my entire life, yet I had not, throughout, my younger years. I had orientation and mobility training, so I was taught how to cross streets safely and how to use public transportation, how to do some basic navigation. And I think at some point in junior high, maybe my O&M teacher asked if I wanted to use a white cane. And of course I said no. At that point, I think I was not sure really where I fit in. I had low vision. I didn't see myself as blind, and I didn't see myself what we would call now as sighted. And so I never learned how to use a cane until I was 22 years old.
So tell us about that first experience with learning to use a cane and also how that informs your work with clients when they're beginning to learn to use a cane.
Yeah, I guess I should say I do have some usable vision in my right eye. I have like a tiny little sliver of a triangle of peripheral vision on the bottom, but really no peripheral vision on the sides. And I can read very, very large print if I hold it up in a certain way, like right in front of my right eye. But I can't do a lot of sustained reading, especially now that I'm into my 40s. But my journey with the cane started right after college. I was getting ready to go to grad school, and I had my low vision exam, and it was in the same town where I was going to be going to grad school, in the town of Wheaton at Spectrios Institute. And my doctor, Tracy Williams, said, you're going to be having to cross streets. Have you thought about using a cane? And I said, no. And he said, I think it might be a good idea. And so at that time, I met my O&M instructor, May, who was just incredible and was really supportive. And she worked with me on my route that I would need to take getting from my apartment, crossing at an intersection to go to the college campus. And I remember it really clearly, pulling out the cane for the first time and feeling like the whole world was watching me and almost holding my breath as I used that cane. And I definitely appreciated it for a mobility tool as far as finding curves, and I appreciated it for identification as I was crossing streets, because prior to that, drivers had no awareness that I didn't have typical vision. So I appreciated those aspects. But as soon as I got into the building where I had my classes, I would fold up that cane and stick it in my backpack. I did not want to be seen with the cane by others. So it really helps. I mean, I can fast forward and talk about where I am with the cane today. I know we all will together, but it does help me to have that background as far as having so much empathy and compassion for those that I do work with as far as their own cane journeys, because I can definitely relate.
I love that line that you said about you felt like the whole world was watching, because I feel like that I relate with that a lot. And I think a lot of people do. You feel like you were on display all of a sudden, and that it's really something that everyone is noticing and aware of your presence and thinking about maybe what that looked like or what they're assuming. I know that there is, the book The Country of the Blind. I think we've referenced before, one of the best books on blindness I've ever read, by Andrew Leland. And he talks in his book about how the cane, kind of like the word blind, has this signification for most people who are sighted, most people in the world, that it really signifies someone cannot see at all. And so the stigma that comes along with, first, all the assumptions that are made, but then also kind of some of the stigma that somebody might look vulnerable or helpless, or like they need something when really you don't need any help, and all of a sudden you are on display. So I'm wondering, did you notice at all? I know you felt like people were watching, but did you notice any response when crossing the street that first time or the first couple times you used your cane, as far as how others interacted with you compared to how they typically did when you did not use your cane?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just as you were talking, I just remembered my first interaction with someone. It was so positive. There was a day where the train was stopped on the tracks and nobody could get across because this train was stopped on the tracks. And of course, I had my cane out, and I remember another student coming up to me and just being like so sweet and not even bringing up anything to do with vision loss, but we just had this nice connective like conversation, and we exchanged numbers. We're like, we should get together and have tea. And it was just a really, sweet conversation. And I think in that moment, I realized like, oh, I have this cane out. Like, she clearly knows that I'm using it. She sees it. And it was good. Like, it wasn't a barrier to connection. So it was a good thing to really realize that in real time. I think it planted a seed, because it still took it's still a process, and depending on the situation. I think as far as how vulnerable it feels to use a cane, but I think that was just a nice interaction, to remind us that a lot of that is my projection onto others. There's other times that have not felt connected.
I like that you started with a positive example, though. So,
But
well,
yeah,
and that you have that touch point to look back to.
yeah, well, I just like it, that just came to me. I remember her name was Kristen, like, and she was so sweet, and it was a good moment. It was a good reminder, but it's still, I mean, the point is that we don't know how it's going to go every single time. We don't know, it could be a great connection. It could be not good, so
Yes, which that makes the
me,
uncertainty. Yes, I was just gonna
yeah.
say that. So, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to using our cane, and I appreciate how you point out that you feel vulnerable every time you take out the cane, because I can really relate to that.
Mhm.
And sometimes, as a therapist who specializes in adjustment to vision loss, I sometimes feel extra hard on myself when I am feeling vulnerable about bringing out my cane, because it really does often depend on the setting or the surroundings. So, for example, when I'm at a sporting event, that in particular feels like a very vulnerable place to bring out a cane because it's so visually based. I think anywhere where I am where there's a lot of expectation of we're going to be seeing something or doing something that really is focused on vision feels particularly vulnerable, and it's difficult as a therapist because I feel like, "Oh my gosh, I should be over this, like, I shouldn't have this," as Joy named it, cane-o-phobia, which I thought was such a great name for it, and just to clarify, cane-o-phobia is not an actual diagnosis in the
Yes, it is.
What are you talking about? It's so a real thing. Phobia is a real thing.
Yeah.
So, Melissa, in your work with mental health, can you talk a little bit about maybe what a phobia is and some of the differences between phobia and anxiety?
When I think of a phobia, I think of an overwhelming fear that causes us to want to avoid to to a huge degree of whatever we're afraid of. So for me in life, and I can't remember the real name, but I have mothophobia. I do not like moths. So if a moth flies in our house, I get so scared and I try to, lock myself in a room and not be around a moth. So I have a pretty intense avoidant reaction to moths or to whatever we're afraid of.
I can
And
relate with
so,
cats. I'm like that with cats. Yeah, I think most people can relate to something that they have an aversion to. And yet, when it comes to the cane, I find it really interesting that pretty much any client that I'm working with will have some reaction, or any person you meet with like low vision or blindness will have a story about the first time they used a cane, or stories about times where it was really helpful, or other times where it was really frustrating or caused, some type of anxiety. Yeah, absolutely. I've yet to read a book on blindness, and I've read a lot of them that does not have someone struggling with the cane and showing up with the cane, and yet it's something that a lot of people adjust to and start to use regularly, that or a guide dog. I know that's the way that we originally met, Melissa, is from our guide dog outing. I'm curious, now that you're on your second guide dog, I still have my retired one and haven't gotten another one yet, but I'm curious from your perspective using, a guide dog for mobility versus a cane. Do you notice a difference in kind of how you feel stigma-wise or in how people respond?
yeah, that's a good question. I've loved having a guide dog. Like you said, I have my second guide dog now, Argus, and still have my retired guide, Ophelia. But I think a lot of us would say that a guide dog is more of a social bridge. Many people have a really positive reaction when they see us coming with a really cute dog and tend to the dog, I think, tends to help others feel more comfortable engaging with us. I do notice sometimes people will talk to my dog and instead of me, and that's sometimes how the conversation gets started. But as far as social interactions go, I think, sometimes that can feel just more natural having a dog. Besides, like the other, I mean, I feel like, oh, I can just walk. I feel like I'm just flying with my dog. As far as mobility goes, I definitely enjoy like the ease that comes with having a dog.
Do you feel that it has helped you use your cane more easily? I was just thinking about that because I know for myself, I definitely kind of broke the seal for me. I didn't use my cane regularly, but because I started using a guide dog regularly, I got so used to having that support that when I don't have her in other situations, I've been able to just pull out my cane more easily. And I'm curious if that's something common or from your experience.
Yes, that is so true. I feel like in addition to the social confidence that both of my dogs have given me, also, they give us so much information as far as stopping at steps and curves and showing us doors. And like, there's just been a really neat carryover, I would say, with using the cane, and also like the positive association, that people have with seeing us with our dogs. It's also just given me that increased confidence in myself, like self-confidence. And so now I definitely rely on the cane more as a tool as far as finding steps and curves, but I don't take that on as much as far as what people think of me when they see my cane. And I do attribute that, especially to, my first dog, Ophelia, and Carrie, Argus continues that level of confidence. And I love one of our Daring sisters, Kathy. Something she said is coming to my mind. She said the cane or the dog helps to tell a part of our story for us. And so instead of going up to a counter when we don't have a cane or a dog and having to go through and say, hi, and I'm Melissa, I have low vision, can you help me? I can just say, hi, would you be able to help me find the elevator? Or, you don't have to kind of go through this whole big explaining, a piece of your life story to a total stranger, because the cane or the dog kind of explains that piece.
Really good point. And that can kind of go both ways, right? Sometimes it's telling a part of our story in a way that involves some misconceptions because there are so many people who will make assumptions about what we can and can't see. And so many people are not aware that 90% of the blind population has some residual vision, some usable vision. So it can it can go both ways, and it's very helpful though for us to understand that it is a powerful symbol. What was your experience the first time you learned to use a cane? Yeah, so I was a similar age to Melissa. I was, I think, 22 when I was in grad school, and I had gotten a scholarship from the National Federation of the Blind. And as part of that, some of the questions they asked me were surrounding, do you regularly use tools and mobility tools, and do you read in braille and things like that? But I I I hadn't really. I mean, I had a vision itinerant in school growing up. I think they maybe briefly did they ever mention using a cane for mobility training? I
Not
don't
that
even
I
remember.
recall.
But I didn't have a lot of tools. I was teaching in the classroom at the time, and I was very self-conscious, and my vision was quite a bit better at that time, but still legally blind. And so when I was going to the convention as one of the scholarship recipients, I realized that I really needed to show up probably with a cane and I needed to learn how to use it. So I called the state of somebody, Illinois something, and got cane trained with a collapsible foldable cane. And I still remember when my mother-in-law dropped me off at the airport, and I unfolded the cane, and I was thinking, okay, here we go. But I had been trained with this really great cane trainer in Illinois who had me go through revolving doors and all kinds of things that I felt I made sure that we did the training in Chicago, mostly because I didn't want to be identified in my town. I didn't want to be seen in Naperville doing cane training. Even years later, when I got cane trained again in order to get my guide dog when I was a young mom, early 30s, a different trainer came, and I wore, it was like winter, and I wore a giant scarf around my head, and I said, "Oh, I want to just get the full experience, like, so that I'm not seeing any light perception, that I'm really good at cane training." But really, I was just hoping the scarf would cover my identity again so that the neighbors wouldn't see me. But unfortunately, a little neighbor girl was like, "I saw you walking around with that scarf on your head and the cane," so it kind of just didn't work. But anyways, back to my original cane story. I went to the National Federation in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was using it at that, and felt totally normal because there was tons of people who are blind using canes, and I felt really surrounded by people who, okay, this is okay. Nobody's looking at me. Nobody can really see me. And the ones who can, who are family members, this is all normal to them. So I went through this whole, I think I was there for like 5 days, and I was like this almost cane immersion using it. And then I flew right from there to my best friend Audrey's wedding in Boston, and I promptly folded the cane up. I remember, I think, Mel, you and Tori picked me up from the airport, and I don't think I used the the cane during that whole trip. Do you remember me using
No,
it
you
the
did
first
not.
time? Okay. But I remember even then going, folding it up, and we had a friend who was in school to become a low vision optometrist, and I thought, "Oh, maybe I could use it in front of her." So I kind of had it, like, in my bag close to me thinking, "Maybe I'll use it. Maybe I'll even just start talking about my experiences at the National Federation of the Blind conference so that maybe she could, um, help encourage me." And I talked to her a little bit, but I still felt, again, just so self-conscious about using it. So then, yeah, I folded it up and didn't really, besides that conference, use it again until, 10 years later when I wanted a guide dog, which is pretty common. I just have to say, Melissa, I know you work with people adjusting to vision loss too. And from going to NFB, different conventions, and connecting with different blind people and clients, I've learned that quite a number of people will sort of dabble with using the cane and not really fully use it for quite a number of years. Is that your experience as well, Melissa?
I think so too. I mean, it's definitely such a journey. And like you were saying earlier, I think there's so much pressure to think like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or I shouldn't, I should just like be all in, like I think it can be doubly so as, when we have vision loss and then when we're a therapist, working within that community. But we think we're supposed our feelings, we're supposed that we think about the word acceptance. And to me, I've always struggled with that word. I think people think that it means we're just supposed to feel okay about it all the time, and to me it's
Right.
kind of like making the most out of the situation that we're in, and doing the best we can. So I think it is important just to normalize that, yeah, like it's not just like a black and white thing that one day we're not using it and one day we're all in, that it's a process. Even
Sure.
still, it can be fluid for me depending on the day or how much sleep did I get or where I'm going and all of it. And just you know, to have compassion for that.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I've noticed family members and friends of people losing vision will often start to get in this mentality. Well, if they would just do this, if they would just use their cane, if they would, and they start to think like that will just solve everything. And it tends to be more complex than that. Mm-hmm. Agreed. I'm wondering, Janelle, you haven't shared your story yet, the first time that you use a cane, and I think it's a pretty funny one, so I would love for our listeners to hear. Well, similar to what we've talked about in our blog, Joy and I have written about our experiences and how different they have been. Even though we're identical twins, we have approached blindness very differently. And I think the cane is a great example of that because I did not seek out cane training until my early 30s when Joy was getting a guide dog, and I wanted to surprise her. My youngest sister, Jillian, and I flew down and surprised her when she got her guide dog in California. And I thought, well, I can't show up to this guide dog graduation not having my own O&M skills. So that really prompted me to want to get that training. And again, at the time, I still had so much usable vision that I really was resisting the cane. And so I actually found it quite difficult to find cane training initially. So I called our Washington State Department of Services for the Blind. And because had a little toddler at the time and a preschooler, I was not seeking any type of vocational training. And they said I had to have a certain goal to be able to get the training. I don't know if that's still the rules, but those were the rules at the time. And at least that is what I was told, and then I called various organizations, and I either wasn't old enough or blind enough. There were so many reasons why I didn't qualify trying to even get this cane training, and I found that really frustrating. I think that is actually the case around the country for a lot of people in the US trying to get cane training, and I know there's some great programs that, like, Guide Dogs for the Blind have started with O&M immersion programs, but I eventually remembered that Joy had talked about the National Federation of the Blind, and so I thought, "Well, that's an organization that they must help blind people." I mean, it's in the title, so I looked up the phone number and got a hold of the president, who's still the president of the Washington State NFB, Marcy Carpenter, and she so graciously invited me to come to West Seattle, and she would give me a day-long cane training. And so I was really grateful for that. She was doing that as a volunteer, and we agreed to meet at a Starbucks, and I didn't know what Marcy looked like, and I was pretty nervous, and I remember sitting in there waiting, and I was like, "Well, I don't know if I'll be able to see her because of the lighting and because I don't know what she looks like, but she'll have a cane, so that will be very telling." So I hear this, like, tap, 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 and I was like, "Oh, hi, Marcy," and I turned, and it was a Starbucks employee mopping. Someone with a mop. It's not Marcy, not
No.
Marcy. So eventually Marcy arrived and started teaching me to use a cane. And I just remember feeling so curious about the experience and also very self-conscious as you both have shared. And I specifically remember this mom, and this is the interesting thing about having a lot of usable vision when you're learning to use a cane is you can see the expressions on people's faces. You can see how they're responding. You can see people looking at you. I remember a mom walking with a stroller and her going out of her way to be really friendly. "Hello, ladies." How? Because we're two ladies walking down the street with canes. And she says, "Hello, ladies. How are you today?" And I thought that was really kind, and I also wondered, would she be quite as friendly if we didn't have canes? I'm always kind of asking those questions to myself, like, would I be treated differently with or without a cane in this scenario? And I remember having this thought of just yesterday, I was walking down the street pushing my son in his stroller without a cane, and I wanted to shout to her, "I'm just like you. I'm not different. I have a baby, I have a stroller," and just this sense of not wanting to feel separate from other people. And I think that is really part of the experience of using a cane and having that become part of your identity. Because that's such a good point, Janelle, because there's so many parts of our identity that coincide with disability, and there's so many parts of everyone's identity, but we don't walk down the street knowing everyone's struggles or the things they're dealing with. And yet when you have a mobility tool like a cane, you're kind of showing your hand. Everybody knows, oh, that's one of the pieces of your identity, but you don't necessarily know it reverse, and especially if you can't see someone. And I know that's something that comes up a lot with people who have vision and can see faces. Andrew Leland talks about it again in his Country of the Blind book, just about even people telling him, like seeing him look at them and one guy shouting to him, "You're not really blind," or "You're not blind." And I know, Janelle, you've had similar experiences like that. And I'm wondering if, yeah, both Melissa and Janelle, if either of you have had experiences of where you are using your eyes for something and you have somebody that you feel kind of like an imposter using a cane.
Yeah, I think there is this awkwardness that I've felt really my whole life because I do have some usable vision. And so I've never, or in the past, I'll say in the past, because I think it's different now that I realize that blindness is a spectrum. That language has given me a lot more freedom to relate or to even use the word. Now I'll say if I'm asking for help, I'll just say I'm blind without having to give an explanation. But in the past, when my own understanding was that if I said I'm blind, I'm in the dark blind, I see no light. That's kind of what people believed about blindness. And I absolutely did not have great vision. That was obvious. I felt, it's what we talk about, like fake it till you make it. And I felt like if I hold my phone up, then and I'm using my cane, then they're going to see that I'm using a cane, but I obviously do have some vision. So I'm an imposter. I'm like an imposter faking it, pretending to be blind because people think that I should see nothing at all. And so it's a lot of what I would call impression management, where you're trying all the time to control, really, have some sense of control over what others around us are thinking about us. And to some degree, that's human nature. That's why fashion is a thing. Like we try to keep up with the latest trends. and we try to assimilate in that way. But then there's also a part of fashion maybe where we also embrace having our own, our own style in a sense. And so I think that's kind of been the journey for me, like knowing that, okay, like I can do this in my own way and I can let go a little bit more. I can practice letting go because it is practice. It's not something I can just be like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. It's a process of really being conscious that I can't control what other people around me are thinking or feeling. I only know what I'm thinking and feeling.
Really good point. What about you, Janelle? I know that this is something that you've experienced as well. Yeah, I have a specific memory in graduate school of returning from lunch with some of my classmates, and we were going across a crosswalk, and I was using my cane to navigate. And in Seattle, there are quite a number of people who are unhoused, and a number of them have some mental health conditions that lead them to maybe kind of yell things sometimes at people or show up in ways that are really unstable. And a man who was already yelling other things, I caught his attention, and I think perhaps I maybe made eye contact with him. I'm not sure why he started yelling this, but he started yelling, "She can see, she can see, she can see." I just remember this response in my body of like my face flushed red. I felt so hot. I had that frozen feeling. And what really struck me though is, and I love my grad school friends dearly, and some of them might be listening, but I was pretty shocked that none of them said anything to me. Like everyone was like, I felt their support, but I was surprised that with all of the unpacking we were doing about intersectional identities, that no one really brought that up. And it just reminded me how disability is one of the topics. I mean, there's a lot of topics that are tense in our culture today around race and gender and so many different topics, but disability tends to really be pushed to the margins and is not spoken about really openly. And I don't know if either of you have thoughts on
No,
but I
that.
think that's a good point, Janelle, that disability sometimes gets left out of the conversation. And then also your point, Melissa, about impression management, because here, that's a lot on someone when they're going out to use a cane. You're not only thinking about your physical surroundings, the use of your cane, how to actually navigate, and all of the orientation and mobility skills that you're using, feeling the graded surfaces, having, when your cane connects with an object. But then on top of that, all of the backstories that are going in your mind about what people are thinking. And then you have the outside stimulus of someone actually shouting, she can see, it comes up. If we are between these two worlds, and you might feel like an imposter in the blind world, and then you might feel like an imposter in the sighted world. I think there's that juxtaposition, right, of like being in two worlds, and how do you handle that? And that none of us are trying to be imposters. We're literally just trying to live our lives. That's what I think about. I even remember when I was doing my initial low vision assessment with different tools that could work, and I was using these different magnifying glasses as best I could. I'm always just trying to perform my best at any type of medical visit. And I remember the gal saying, "Oh, you're faking it," and going on to the next thing. And I'm not faking it. I was just trying to use the magnifier not really well because it's a lot to manage, and it can be
Mhm.
incredibly exhausting. And that's why I really appreciate that earlier you brought up just the amount of empathy and compassion that you learned for yourself as you've learned to navigate with the pain, and that you're able to then extend to your clients.
And I loved your point too about how, the people in our lives, they can see kind of more objectively that the cane is a great tool because it is. It's a great identifying tool and it's a great mobility tool. And yet I'm so grateful that you're unpacking the social part and the emotional part around using the cane. And hopefully that will give a little context and perspective and just make that a little more relatable to the people who really care about us and who want to see us, out and about and just kind of taking on the world. But hopefully it'll just kind of fill in that empathy piece if they can imagine having to really put themselves out there, in a similar way.
Yeah, and that it's real. Like anyone out there who's struggling, like, oh, it's if people are telling you in your life, it's all in your head that you're feeling self-conscious about using a cane. No, no, that's real. That is a real fear. I have had multiple people in my life when I wasn't using my cane regularly or telling people about my vision. Well, if you would just tell people, everything would be fine. If you would just do this, everything would be fine. Okay, I did that. I used my cane, and guess what? I have another set of problems now. Like
Mhm.
there's other things that come up with that because as again, I'm going to keep bringing up this book, Bigotry of the Blind. It goes into the social backstory and history of blindness, and there have been some really real stigmas and disparities between people who are blind and people who are sighted and some very real discrimination. So I think that none of that is made up either. So yeah, I have to say, after I got over the initial shock of that man yelling, she can see, I actually felt almost a little sense of relief that someone who was clearly not mentally stable, was saying out loud what I feared other people were thinking.
Mm.
Sometimes just having that come to reality feels like, okay, this isn't just in my head. I'm not paranoid. There are actually misconceptions and judgments happening. And now I can work with that. And I almost find it easier to work with that reality than that some of the judgmental undertones that I feel from people, but they're not actually saying,
Mm.
almost more difficult to deal with. Yeah, it might look like I, uh, can't see. I do have some vision. I think even in the book, Andrew Leland said, "Yep, I can," or something like that, like, "You can see."
Yes.
"Yep, I can."
Yep.
So
Yeah, yeah. I've said a few times lately, yeah, I do have some usable vision, and I leave it at that. And it may not make sense to somebody else, but I'm acknowledging that, yeah, I do have some, or I love the language that both of you have used. Yeah, I do have some puzzle pieces of vision, because that's a really good description of what my visual fields looks like. I have a ton of missing puzzle pieces of vision, but here and there I have some vision. We're put in this really awkward situation with both communities at times that we feel like we have to apologize, or that we shouldn't feel this way. That's touching on like the whole disenfranchised grief, that we shouldn't feel the way that we do. And that's not true.
yes,
That's not
I
true. So,
I so relate, Melissa. Remember getting my first guide dog and thinking, "Oh gosh, I probably shouldn't give as much eye contact as I can give," and kind of just looking to the side or down, like when working with trainers and stuff. They're gonna know how much vision I have, even though, I sent my vision records. They all knew, I'm sure, my vision.
yes.
But then, recently when I had a guide dog trainer come out, they still check on even when the dog's retired if you haven't turned in the harness yet, and trying really, really hard to make eye contact this time and was having and struggling with it because of the amount of vision I've lost and thinking, "Oh gosh, I hope I'm able to really focus on this person." So I think it goes both ways. You find yourself trying to fit. It's just trying to belong, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
connect. Yeah, which is
Yes.
normal human experience. I think all of us, to some degree, like you brought up earlier, Melissa, are working on that impression management. I think that's why social anxiety is at such a high in our culture. People talk about that so much because there are a lot of things to feel uncertain about and self conscious about. And yet, here we are making the connections and allowing ourselves to support one another in this process and just letting it be okay that we have these experiences and there's nothing wrong with us or with anyone that has these fears or these uncertainties related to using a cane and gaining more independence that way.
Yes, yes, just like the common humanity of it all. No one alive would ever say, like, oh, I'm never going to feel socially awkward again. I just decided today I'm never going to be awkward again. I feel like that's helped me a lot too, to realize that even though people may not be able to identify with having a vision loss or even a disability, I know that as people, we've all had awkward moments where that whole belonging uncertainty. We've all had times where we want to connect so much and then we just feel like it's not happening. And to me, that has taken some pressure off too, like to know this feeling that I'm feeling is just a very normal human feeling. It happens to be around vision loss, but most people could relate to that feeling of just really wanting to connect.
It's very human. So some language that we have learned through the Daring Sisters program, which comes from Brene Brown, is finding our brave. And so I'm wondering, when it comes to finding our brave around cane use, what are some stories or techniques that both of you have used to find your brave? So for me, I think I had shared that my first time using my cane was at the NFB Louisville 20 years ago. And I remember there, even though there were some times where I folded out my cane and I felt like everybody had these really tall white kinds and I just had this collapsible kind. And somebody said, "Oh, I haven't seen these for years." So I all of a sudden felt out of place at first, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I don't even have the right kind of cane, to fit in here." But what I did notice and start to observe from a group of women who really took me in, because I was assigned to a mentor who was just amazing. So him and his wife, they kind of, it was the Utah NFB chapter, kind of adopted me, and I hung around a lot of their participants. And two of the women, Sherilyn and Louise, just were like around my age, and they wore really cute clothes. They had these, I remember, these long, pretty skirts, and they had these tall canes. And they just, to me, when they moved, they seemed so like regal and confident and seemed very beautiful. They just looked very comfortable in their skin and in their bodies. And I used that as encouragement when I would feel nervous before grabbing my cane. I would just picture, oh, you can be like Sherilyn and Louise, and you can just be out there and look beautiful and confident. And I would just kind of go with that mindset when I still sometimes do it. And I just picture myself as them instead of as myself. And it just helps me.
Mm. I love that. And on a similar note, I would say there's just so much encouragement when we're with others who are using canes. I know on our in-person during sisters retreats, sisters have talked about that a lot, how they found courage when they saw a bunch of ladies using their canes, just going out for lunch and like walking down the street, 12 sisters, with canes and dogs, both. And it's encouraged other sisters to, find their brave to go and get O&M training. So again, it goes back to that power of connection and community, knowing that we're not alone and seeing, a positive example of other people. Yeah, I love that. Just walking with grace and beauty with the cane.
And it reminds me of, once again, some of the misconceptions, because one of my memories from being together in 2016, it's a group of 12 women on our retreat, is there was one woman in our group, Lacey, who hadn't learned to use a cane yet, and she had quite a bit more usable vision at that time. And she was with all of us, but not using a cane. And a man came up to her. Do you guys remember this?
Yes.
And gave his business card at lunch and said, "I think what you're doing is amazing. Here's my card if I can donate or support your group." And he thought she was like the caretaker or like the group leader. Yeah. And she was like, "What is going on?" And then it was an opportunity, though, for us all to just laugh about that, instead of just feeling alone in those situations of like, oh, here's another person having a misconception about what it means to have a disability, what it means to be blind. We're able to take those moments and laugh together about it and turn it into it's kind of one of my favorite memories of that first retreat, of just how much it made us all laugh. Going back to that, yeah, just the laughter, having that be part of it. And then I know people have gotten so creative too over the years. There's so many friends who have decorated their canes, or they buy these really cute ones now, or ones that are sparkly. And now there's ones that are like hiking and they have a leather handle and they can kind of, be something that it's not just something you get from the state that looks so plain and very medical. There's ways to kind of make it feel more like you, right?
Yeah.
And there's free programs. This is pretty incredible. Like the Guide Dogs for the Blind has their free O&M immersion program. And when you attend that program, they pay for all your travel, all your cane skills. I went through the program last spring, and then you get to choose a cane. And I chose this really nice no jab cane. So I do like to mention that because I think sometimes it starts to feel like, wait, is this just people who are, middle or upper class and going blind? But really, there
Mm.
are resources out there today that are for people of all socioeconomic statuses. Yeah, that's such a
Mhm.
good point. And that even kind of bringing it back to Daring Sisters or Daring Brothers now that we have those retreats as well that are offered. I know for people who can't afford to go to do those or to do those virtually, Melissa, is there assistance for people to attend those for less cost?
Yes, definitely. There's always scholarships available. We don't want there to be any cost barrier. So please reach out. We would love to have whoever wants to be a part of those retreats. We would love to have you there.
Awesome. And if someone is interested in going on any retreat, is there a website or something that they can reach out to?
For the Daring Sisters retreats, you can go to the website, daringsisters.com, and then you can email hello daring sisters at gmail.
So this episode is launching on October 15th, which is National White Cane Day. And so if you're listening to this episode on this day and maybe your cane is folded up in your bag or in the back of your closet, like our friend Terry Rupp used to keep hers at the back of her closet, likes to tell those stories. Melissa and Joy, what would you tell folks today to participate in this day? Yeah, so I think if you even want to unfold it and use it around the house a little bit just to kind of get those jitters out, or maybe you do want to, go to a town next door where you don't know people or with a friend who makes you feel really comfortable and they joke a lot, who you can go out with for the first time to kind of break that in. And maybe it won't help every time, but if you can, give it a shot if you think it's going to help. I mean, it is there as a tool. So it's there not only for identification, like Melissa brought up earlier, when people can see to kind of move out of your way. So there might be less run-ins, but then even sometimes the mayhem or chaos that can come from living with vision loss of knocking things over. When people have that awareness, there tends to be less chaotic things that happen and then less injuries as well. So it really is a great tool. And yet it is completely understandable that you might need to take it in phases and you might need to use the Daring Sisters word, to try on your brave. And maybe certain days you're feeling brave and you can do it and you have a mantra or something in your little saying that you're going to go out for, like, I can do this, I can do hard things. And maybe other days you're like, you know what, I just can't today. And that's okay. And to be really gentle on yourself and have compassion for those days as well.
Mhm. So true. And I'm just thinking about our families. Like I know for me, being a mom, I think it was so helpful to have that practice around my kids. Like kids are so non-judgmental. So maybe you're not a parent, maybe you're an aunt, or maybe you have neighbors that are kids. I would just say that kids are just so curious. And so it really helped me to be able to practice using my cane as a mom around my kids, and just to even have my kids get excited to this day if I get a new cane and want to know, what it feels like and how it is. So if that's a nugget that could help others, definitely want to put that out there.
There are groups such as the NFB and ACB that are gathering together on White Cane Day. They have different locations in various cities where you can gather with other people using white canes, which could be a great way to meet people and just to experiment with what it looks like. I remember the first time that I brought my cane on a trip with some girlfriends and one of them commenting, "It's like the parting of the seas, like people just get out
Mm.
of your way." And that felt really freeing. Whereas before I'd go on girls' trips and feel like I was always kind of lingering behind or worried I was about to run into someone, it can feel really empowering.
I love what you said about the airport, though. I've had a couple of clients tell me that that was the best place to practice using their cane to build up their confidence and to use it, when we're doing pre-boarding, because that is such a help not to have to board with the entire plane, to be able to go up to the counter with your cane and use it, and say, I'd like to pre-board. And like you said, Janelle, the parting of the Red Seas, and that's an environment where we're not with people we know. So I think it's a great idea. If you're taking a trip, think about taking your cane with you.
Yes. It is so funny on trips because that's where, again, I had wanted to bring this up earlier, but when I folded it back after that first trip where I was using it constantly for a week in Louisville, and then I folded it up, it was like, oh, like close that chapter of my life. I don't have to be blind anymore. Like I don't have to be the blind person. Like I felt like a movie, like I'm stepping out of that movie and back into this other one. And now I'm like, oh, and now I'm back into sometimes I still feel like that. Like I'll use my cane a ton when I'm in the city or traveling, and then I'll get home and I'll put it away and feel like this sense of like, okay, I can just be in my home right now. I think sometimes like I fear like as podcasters and as clinicians, we have this responsibility to encourage people to use their cane. And I definitely want to do that. And at the same time, I also want to be really aware of what my own journey has been and what those so many clients I've worked with has been, and is that it's really hard, and to really acknowledge that both are true.
Yeah, so well said. And that they can both be true at the same time. I love that. That's so true.
This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Melissa. I have always told people that, gosh, the way that you put language to things, if I wanted somebody to write a book about some of the things we talk about, you would be up there as one of the people I would want to read. So thank you for sharing your wisdom, your language, your stories, the conversation with us. It's been so fun to do this in this setting, a little away from our WhatsApp messages for a bit.
Aw, thank you both so much. That's so sweet. And I feel the same way about both of you. And I'm so excited after loving reading your blog all these years. I'm so excited about your podcast. And I feel like both of you really mirror that connection that we all really want so much. So thank you. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you for listening to Double Vision Podcast. If you found this valuable, we'd love for you to leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice or subscribe on YouTube. We'd also love for you to keep in touch with us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. And if you have an idea for an episode or something that you'd like to process, please feel free to leave us a voice message at 949-414-8336. or send us an email at mail@doublevisionblog.com.